All right, guys. Anthony with Austin Historical Weapons Guild here with Andreas, once again broadcasting from our home away from home at Vigilante. Tonight we are wrapping up Jude Lew, the blue and yellow effect book, which if you don't have, definitely recommend, definitely worth digging into and playing with. But a lot to cover tonight, and I want to finish up, so just jumping right in. Starting on page 187. Do the Spreckfenster. Stand unconcerned and watch what he is up to. If someone wants to withdraw, hit him swiftly, so that he will give up. I'll tell you indeed, nobody will be able to protect himself without danger. If you have understood this, he will hardly come to strikes. Item. Notice. You've heard before, go into the 4 guards with the sword. Now you shall know about the Spreckfenster, which is a guard in which you can stand very safely. This guard is the long point, the most noble, and best defense at the sword. He who can fight out of it forces the man with it so that he has to allow being struck involuntarily, and he cannot sufficiently come to any strikes in front of it. So, quick review, just because we're there, talking about guards, talking about long point, key notes, at least from this that we haven't heard or talked about before. 4 main guards in the Lichtenauer system. So we have Von Tog from above. I realize you can't see my hands, but I'm up. My arms are nice and straight. My sword is fairly straight and vertical. I'm not going to be straight up. I want to keep my hands in good structure, good posture. You can also do Von Tog from the shoulder, as so. Again, I'm liking it outside, off the side, kind of like that. You can't really see it in this light, but yeah, off to the side. You can, whether it's up here, whether it's down there, just know that Von Tog is kind of this general shoulder position or straight above. We also have Flug, which is at the hips, point forward. We have Ox, which is above the head, again, point forward, point down. We have Elber, which is kind of that relaxed position, left foot forward, I believe, according to Lew, but traditionally either foot forward doesn't particularly matter. So those are your 4 main guards. Long point is the midpoint of your cuts. It's the position when you're extended out. In my belief, because we haven't done anything against it yet, it's not this, right? Wrist broken, maximum extension. This is not how you hold a longsword ever. Longsword will want to be here. I want structure, I want base, I want to be able to move and fight, I want to be able to displace. This is a guard. This is where I'm safe. If I'm here and Andreas cuts at me, I can't do anything to stop his attack. But if I'm out here, in my long point here, now I can fight with my body. I can turn my hips, I can press, I can drive, but really sitting in this structure makes the difference. Like, sure, I lose, what, 6, 8 inches maybe, if that, but that length, that depth isn't worth losing the structure and power that you can generate from a good, proper long point. So again, back's fully engaged, arms extended, swords out forward. This is long point, or according to this section of Jude Lew, Spreckfenster, which is the speaking window. All right. Make the Spreckfenster thus. When you approach the man in the Zufechten and come at him with whatever strike, be it an Oberhau or an Unterhau, then shoot the point always long out of the arms with the strike to the face or the breast. With this, you force him that he has to displace or bind. As soon as he is bound, remain strong with the long edge on the sword and stand unconcerned. Right? So if I have those broken arms, I clearly can't stand unconcerned. If I'm in that good structure, good posture, I clearly can. Observe what he is up to and what he wants to fence against you furthermore. If he pulls back from the sword, follow him with the point towards the face or the breast. If else he strikes around from the bind to the other side, then cut strongly over his arms and work above towards his head. Or if he does not intend to either pull back from the sword or strike around, then work with the duplieren or with other pieces according to your sensing whether he is strong or weak at the sword. So basically this whole chunk, this whole chapter says do all the things we just talked about. And there's not a whole lot more in that piece, in that part. The thing that I found interesting, found weird kind of in there, is they're talking about from whatever cut I'm throwing, from Zufek, I'm throwing a cut, but it's less about throwing a cut all the way through, I think. And he's saying like, throw the cut, but then who cares? Go to long point. Like however I come, throw out to long point. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, I want to finish in long point. Almost arguably, and this again off the cuff, that the cut's just an action, right? This is just here showing I'm moving the sword forward, I'm doing something, but at some point during this cut, probably low, I'm gonna go, nope, I'm in long point now. Deal with that. I'm stopping my cut to go to long point and stopping there. And that's a very strange, interesting idea in that I'm no longer worried about pulling this cut all the way through and finishing it down. I'm starting my cut, but then changing out to long point. And it's kind of a weird thing to put into practice, weird thing to play out to. And just playing with it that little bit, I'm definitely feeling that these motions are far more planned out, right? We're approaching in Sprechfenster. We know everything else he's taught us. This is safe. This is where we want to go. So I'm no longer worried about throwing this cut to make a bind and feel like, oh, he's hard on the bind. I'm going to go to my duplier. The cut doesn't matter. I need to move the sword. So I'm going to start a cut. But instead, I'm just going here. And I got there first because I don't care about the cut anymore. And now I can feel like, oh, what are you going to, oh, you're going to do, well, there. Pushing off too hard, well, we know that from the other one. That's why Abnomen. I start getting these options, these plays, no longer based on feeling out of a cut, but from feeling out of a static position that I kind of cheat my way into through a cut. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So we're no longer, even though we're throwing a cut, I'm just going to this position. And I can feel right now like, oh, he's overpowered me by a lot. I'm just going to come around. Oh, he's come off there. I'm going to press through and kind of starting to work to those options. And I kind of feel like at first blush for myself, that's definitely a solid takeaway, solid application of that. Other things I want to highlight from here. So starting from the bind. So first thing he says, if he pulls back from the sword, follow him with the point towards the face or the breast. So this is kind of, if he's not, so not pulling around to cut, if he's just pulling away and kind of backing off, right? So we're in this neutral position. If he goes to disengage or pull back, I just charge through and do things. The Chase Andreas off stage. He strikes around from the bind to the other side. Cut strongly over his arms and work above towards his head. So again, I'm in my Sprechfenster, right? I just cut strongly there, right? And I hit the arms, and I work to the head. If he starts to parry and catch that around, right, then I just start to work high and threaten the head and kind of make those displacements happen. I think I mentioned Mutier and Duplier. If he does not intend to either pull back from the sword or strike around, then work with Duplier and other pieces according to senses. So he's really giving us three very clear-cut options. I'll demonstrate them this time so I can talk through them. So we're in the bind, we're in the neutral bind, right? There's three things I can do. The third option, the most obvious option, I'm just going to sit here, right? And if I'm pushing hard, he can do a Duplier, right? If I'm super weak and know how to center, he can just mute and work from there without doing anything, right? So that's option three. Option two is cutting around, right? Real simple. I disengage to go and make a cut. Whether it's a big, dumb, kind of slow thing, whether I'm trying to work a quick, almost schnappen if he's really giving me some pressure, cutting around. These are all cutting around. The first option he gives us is kind of, if he tries to leave, I'm just going to back this up. I'm demonstrating. I just back this up. If the other person backs up, takes him down, driving the point. Yeah. And if it goes, wherever it goes, because they're trying to leave that bind, and you've kind of created and taken that space. So that's kind of where, for me, they're really highlighting Sprechfenster is this idea that once you get to the bind, if you get there first, if you're static in the bind and no longer cutting into the bind, you have a lot more options because your force is no longer being fought. Of course, much easier to say than it is to do. Item. Thus you shall make the Sprech fencer. It consists of 2 guards with the long point, one at the sword, the other one in front of the man before you, bind at his sword or before the swords flash together, yet it is by itself nothing more than a guard. Let's try that again. Item, thus you shall make the Sprech fencer. It consists of 2 guards with the long point, one at the sword, so I assume at the bind, maybe. The other one in front of the man before you bind at his sword, or before the sword flash together. So yeah, and yet it is by itself nothing more than a guard. So this is exactly what I was hinting at in the prior chunk, right? So if he does nothing, I can still throw my little cut and finish out in Sprech fencer before the cut comes through. So this is one guard of Sprech fencer, right before the man without the swords touching. If he reacts to my cut and I still get a Sprech fencer, this is the other guard of Sprech fencer. And I'm really just finding this position, snapping this position as quickly as I can. And that's kind of what that item talks about and highlights. That this is a position you can use if you're in a bind. This is a position you can use if you haven't found a bind yet, or it's cutting at your sword. Just, it's a guard. It's another position to learn to use, to work from, and to do things from. All right, item. I say indeed that the long point is the most noble defense of the sword, because you force the man with it that he has to allow being struck. And also he cannot succeed to carry out any strike. Therefore you shall with all strikes drive in the point to the man, to the breast, or to the face, and you shall furthermore carry out thrusts and strikes all out of it. Really not much more to this. I guess is the flip side of the guard, right? So we have to be able to move into guards quickly and easily, and this is move out of guards quickly and easily. So again, most noble defense, because it can force the man with it that he has to allow being struck, right? There's nothing he can do against long point to not get cut, because anything he puts off, if he backs away, if he pushes in, all those things I have options and answers for. So with all strikes, driving the point to the man, to the breast, or the face, and you shall furthermore carry out strikes and thrusts out of it. So again, anything I'm doing, I'm really from the Zufectin, right? I don't do this in Krieg, in the War, in the Bind. That's when the wounders come up. This is for the pre-fencing. So I'm here, I'm always throwing this out, trying to work at the head or face, and making sure I'm no longer caring about this cut, right? I know how to cut, I know how to move the sword. Like, this isn't something you do from day one of just like, flick out your sword to long point and hope it works. This is, I know how to cut, I know how to move it. Now I'm just snapping to this position. I no longer care about the cut. Yes, my sword's gonna arc through the air like a cut's gonna be, but it's gonna be a vastly different style of cut than to get there first, because all we care is about getting that guard. Once we have that guard, I'm gonna be able to do all my cuts and thrusts from this position as well. So really just getting comfortable with working from here, making that as good for you as Ox or Flug or Von Tog already should be. Item, note this is also a Sprech fencer. When you have almost come in the Zufectin to the opponent, so this is interesting, this is delineating a outside bound to Zufectin, which is something we've never seen, had talked about before, at least in my personal ken, which doesn't mean it's not there, it just means when I read it, I didn't understand it. Then put the left foot forward and hold the long point with the arms against the face of the breast before you bind unto his sword. So just saying left foot forward. Stand unconcerned and look out when he intends to fence against you. When he strikes above at you, then go up with the sword and wind against his strike in the ox and thrust to his face. Or else if he strikes towards your body and not towards your sword and not the body, then boldly change through and thrust into his side. But if he runs into you with erect arms, then carry out the lower cut, or if he keeps his arms low, then attend to the wrestling techniques. Thus you can execute all the pieces from the arms, the one which suits you best. So again, really just emphasizing that all these cool things we've worked on, all these things we've found, learned it from Sprech fencer. And if you've, I'll use the term mastered very loosely here, but if you've mastered all the other techniques of the Lichtenauer reverse, then start applying them from a spec fencer and saying from left foot forward, same thing, right? Before we've done it right foot forward because it's from a cut. Left foot forward, nothing really changes. I'm still working these positions, working these angles. Quick demonstrations of the notes he had. When he strikes above at you, go up with the sword and wind against his strikes in the ox and thrust to his face. So if I'm here and he somehow cuts again anyway, I just go to ox, right? Easy set off, working in there. Again, like if this was real, I'd be stepping through to ox a little bit sooner, making that a little bit safer, not kind of letting those hands exposed do work. But no matter which side, super straightforward transition work. If he strikes towards your sword and not to the body, boldly change through and thrust to his other side. So again, this is your direct vexel. As I'm here, if he cuts at my sword, I just drop it, take it away, and thrust back in with that step, right? So again, change out, back, through into the center. But if he runs into you with a erect arm, so his arm's above his head, carry out the lower cut. So this I'm less certain about what he's talking about. I don't think he's going to impale himself, but otherwise he'd have bounded his sword. So maybe this is like, so let's play this out, right? So you're coming in, charging from above, right? If I just let this happen, right, he dies a little bit, but this doesn't stop this from coming up. So it says carrying out the lower cut, and I bet there's a lower schnitt. So I'm just pressing up there. Because if you remember last time we saw a cut, it really was a schnitt, the slice to the arms. So this is the Unterschnitts. Let's check our, German. But if he runs into you with erect arms.
Nach den unteren Schnitt. Well, the lower cut. It's not a word.
Yeah. But schnitt we had a slice before, more traditionally in the Lichtenauer system. Schnitt's a slice. It's that pressing. It's not a hue cut. It's a I'm pressing on something and sliding on it. Slicing cut, just to delineate between the three wounders. Or if he keeps his arms low, then tend to the wrestling techniques. Thus, you can execute out all the pieces in the arm. So again, so now if he charges in low, whether it's in flug, whether it's in whatever, because he can again work into my sword, but he's not cutting, so I can't just disengage and try to stab him. So if he's pressing in low, I'm just going to come through and wrestling techniques for this. Lots of options. We can throw to the arm and throw him over the body. Lots and lots of things you can do from there. But all this is again coming out of this idea that I'm in this position, right? I can do this, grab the arm, walk through. Lots of wrestling options. But really that whole section was again, you can do it left foot forward, you can do it right foot forward. Sprechfenster is where everything kind of coalesces in the middle. All right. The conclusion of the new notes. Man, this goes on forever too. All right, let's see how we do. He who leads well and breaks well, finally quite complete, breaks every single one of the three wounders. He who hangs rather well performs the windings with this. There are 8 windings, and when you consider it correctly, every single winding comes in a threesome. Thus, there are 24. Count every single one from both sides. Learn 8 windings with steps and test the encounters only with regard to soft or hard. So, it's a lot in this one. So 3 wounders, again, like we just kind of hinted about, you have a thrust at kind of maximal distance. You have a hew at kind of that middle distance. And when you're even closer, you have the cut or the schnitt, the slice if you prefer. So you have 3 wounders. There are 8 windings. Oh, hangers are from the windings. Hopefully we'll talk about these in more detail. Yeah, so hangers are the windings. So we'll get into those. But if you have 8 hangers and 3 wounders, it gives you 24 options. That's kind of what this ties into. So learn the 8 windings, and each of these have hard and soft reactions. So I don't know, math gets lost and high at that point. There's a lot of stuff to pay attention to. So 193. This is one lesson, a reminder of the art of the sword. You shall be utterly ready and experienced in it so that you can execute it nimbly and orderly, accomplish the breaks against his pieces with agility. Thus you shall particularly perform the 3 wounders against each break that are being explained hereafter. Furthermore, you shall know the 4 hangings. There are 2 below and 2 above. The upper ones is the ox, the lower ones is the flug on both sides. Now, of these 4 hangings, you shall perform 8 windings. So that's 32. You shall furthermore consider and ponder these very same 8 windings, and from every single winding, you shall carry out especially 1 strike, 1 thrust, and 1 cut. These are the aforementioned 4 windings. 4 windings? I don't know. Numbers. Item. Note here how you shall carry out 8 windings from the 4 hangings. First, the first upper hanging contains 2 windings. Execute them thusly. When you approach him in the Zufechten, stand in the ox on your right side. If he then strikes above to your left side, then wind against the strike, the short edge at his sword, also in the ox, and thrust above toward his face. This is 1 winding. If he displaces the thrust to his left side, remain at the sword and wind again to your right side into the ox, the long edge at his sword, and thrust above towards his face. This is 1 hanging from your right side with 2 windings at his sword. All right, there's a mountain to unpack in this. Let's see if we can get through that. All right, so I'm in my right ox. You're cutting at my left. So we're here. And I need to go to left ox with my false edge and make a thrust. Well, my fingers are not liking that. So I can stab you in the face. Everything but my hand feels nice. All right, so if we scroll way back, he talks about right ox being high, left ox kind of coming out maybe. All right, go ahead.
It's an architect of doing it, so.
Right, and not driving into your face. Are you cutting at me?
If you would come at me, I would probably not finish that.
Try to work your wind off.
Yeah, I think you have to worry about.
Oh, so you'd start pushing against my sword instead of trying to slide down it?
Yeah, yeah.
Got it. Ineffectively. All right, so again, he cuts. I wind through, push against. Hey, you're still driving into my hand in an unpleasant way. I'm wondering, so just react naturally. React against my doing something.
All right.
I don't know. We'll see if adding the second layer makes it better or worse. That index finger is super exposed. Strikes above to your left side and wind against the strike the short edge at his sword, also in the ox. And just above toward his face. This is 1 winding. If he displaces the thrust to his left side,
To my left.
so that's what we just did. Remain at the sword and wind again to your right side into the ox, the long edge at his sword, and just above to his face. So I'm here.
No. Oh boy.
That's not my long edge anymore. That's like my false edge. Well, that's not going to work. I'm just trying the dumb things. So I'm here. Oh. Huh. So I'm wide, and then I don't over rotate. But I'm not really ox anymore is my issue.
This looks broken.
It feels solid, but all right, let me get. So I'm here.
No,
So if I rotate to there, it's a lot of rotation. All right, let's start there. Let's start in this ox. Oh.
That snapped right in.
Okay. So instead of trying to really rotate, yeah. So I come across, that's not my false edge, and this is amazing. I come back through.
Oh, wow.
All right. So the issue, the super minor nuance, is apparently my ox has been off by 30 degrees in my hand. That makes sense. I know that sounds really insignificant. But instead of this ox, when my thumb is on the flat, pressing out, I need to rotate through to this. So my long edge is in. Right. So if we go, we'll see how flug changes from these hangers. But I don't want thumb on, I want thumb out. And this is my ox. So when he comes in for that cut, now I press across, false edge press through there. This is perfect. Like my hand feels super safe. If he comes out, I wind back to that position and I'm super safe and that hand again is protected. So very, very minor nuance with that ox really changes how we work through that. Do you want? We'll play later.
No, it feels really slippery when you do that.
Yeah. Good luck getting those done with Spez Heavies. All right. Execute the second upper hanging, also with two windings thus. When you approach him in the Zufect, instead of the ox on your left side, if he strikes above to your right side, wind against the strike the long edge at his sword and thrust above towards his face. This is also a winding. If he displaces the thrust towards his right side, remain the sword, wind again to your left side in the ox, the short edge at the sword, and thrust above towards his face. This is the second upper hanging on the left side, also with two windings at his sword. All right. The feeling's gonna be the same thing we just did, but backward. See if I can get that same position though. So we were here, here.
Yeah.
So this. So you cut across to my left, I come in, yeah.
I don't like it. Oh God.
Man, it's gonna be a minute to relearn this. All right, so this is thumb under there. You cut, come in, push it off. So here and here. Okay. Moving on. Last item. We have more to talk about, don't worry. Item. Now you should know that you should also carry out 4 windings with all their encounters from the 2 lower hangings, which is the flug on both sides, just the same as from the upper ones. These are the 8 windings. And every time you wind, you shall recall in each and every single winding, especially the strike, the thrust, and the cut. Thus, there are 24 that derive from the 8 windings. From whatever winding against what piece and against that what strike, you shall carry out the strike or thrust or the cut you will find written in the pieces mentioned before. All right, so do the same thing but lower. Man, that means my other guys are probably messed up. All right, so we're here. We'll try this. And you come in with a rising cut. I'll get my short edge into your blade. Maybe. You can't really push that to the other side, can you? Do you think it's a normal cut?
Right.
This one long edge there works way better. All right, so I'm going to assume, which makes sense, right? It'd be opposites are, it wouldn't be left side is all long edge. So short, long, right? So I'm bringing my long edge across. So as you cut, long edge, and my other hanging, short edge, back through. And then here, my short edge. So short edge. I'm not getting that line. All right, so here's a long edge and the short edge and out. Okay. I'm not, oh, there's a long edge. Try that again, because I'm super unconvinced by that. That feels better. So as you parry, cool. All right, so I think you're out of picture for all that. Anyways, may not have seen Andreas for those last few exchanges. That's fine. Takeaways is, I wish I understood this earlier. I said definitely changes a lot of how I think about ox in that high hanging position. No longer the kind of generic this, whatever. I'm really looking to make sure that my right side, I've got the long edge pressed out, so I can snap around here to the short edge safer, right? And then that lets you come back, or the winding is just that from above. The thing I wanted to play with quickly before we sign off on this is looking at the 3 wounders, right? So each of these windings has 3 options of striking, right? So the first option we just went through was a thrust, right? So quickly, first one again, I'm here, I bring the short edge out, line up my thrust, he pushes it aside, I go to my long edge, driving my thrust, right? Straightforward, very simple. If we're closer, these winds, these same motions, I can turn into cuts, right? So we start about here, that half step, step closer. As he cuts in, this is now a strike. If he pushes aside, which he does, is a much smaller motion now, right? So don't go super wide with this because you're safe. This becomes my next strike as I go from here to there. And I kind of work that strike in that way. So again, for the thrust distance, working out, get my short edge in, so I let out my thrust. If he pushes aside, I go to my long edge, get my thrust, working through there. If we're closer, that's a cut, right? I'm getting my short edge in, I'm driving this through. This is, unsurprisingly, a lot like his Verhau, right? As he pushes this aside, which doesn't need to be very far, I snap to my long edge, which is basically a duplieren from this Verhau, to make a long edge cut, striking the other side. So that's what they're talking about when they say practice these as the 3 wounders, practice these motions, be able to do all 3 wounds from all of your transitions, doubling both sides. So you get a total of 24 ways to attack from the bind. And if you take that and pile that on top of all your Sprechfenster work, which Sprechfenster is everything else in the book, then you have everything in KDF in 2 simple plays. So that concludes the longsword section of Jude Lew. Again, I hope you enjoyed our read along. I hope you got some useful information out of it, or found the motivation to do a read through of your own. And this really helped highlight kind of what this can look like, what this can feel like, really just sitting there and playing with the text, trying to understand it, break down the things that don't make sense, look at the totally logical options to completely cross them out until you can come up to something that works for you. And whether it's right, whether it's wrong, that'll work itself out over time as you get more comfortable with what you're doing, as you're into more people who fight different ways and do different things. It's my belief that a system, if it's any good, should be able to hold up to other interpretations, other options, other ways of doing it. And just because yours doesn't match ours perfectly and ours doesn't match someone else's perfectly, in one generation from Lichtenauer, we have 4 different sources available that have, if not wildly conflicting ideas, but definitely distinct and different interpretations. And that's from people who allegedly, at least, worked in the same system and worked together in the same time period. And we're looking at this through a lens of a couple centuries. So of course, it's not going to mesh up identically. The real trick, as I always think of it, is as what works, what comes out on top, what makes sense and applies all the way through. If you can make your things work half the time in an open, uncontrolled situation, that's a pretty good indicator that there's a grain of truth to it. A lot of things definitely fall out to athleticism and ability and skill that can disappoint and frustrate you. So don't let, a low success rate dissuade you from doing it. On the flip side, though, if it never works outside of a very strict controlled environment of a drill, like, we'll make up something dumb here, right? So he throws a cut, we meet in the bind, and I'm gonna go, okay, I'm gonna push this here with my hand, disengage, rebind, half sword, and thrust. That's never gonna work in sparring. There's too many steps, too much motion. It assumes him being way too compliant. But if you can start getting little pieces to work in those uncontrolled situations, in those sparring matches, even in just free play where you're not trying to win but just experimenting, then you've almost definitely found a shred of something that's applicable and real. And as long as it matches the glosses and matches some understanding, you can explain how you got there other than like woke up in a fever dream, I think it's valid. And I said, really honing your technique, honing your art, honing your skill, and just rereading things and talking to people is what's going to let that maneuver. I'll throw myself under the bus. Andreas can probably tell you how many times our Krumpau understanding has changed, right? Way back from the windshield wiper to a cut that kind of curves in the air to our current understanding now, which I'm sure changes every time I teach it as I gain new insight or forget how I talked about things. And that's kind of the beauty of what we do. So don't let that discourage you. Don't let this dissuade you. Really just dig into these things, have some fun, and reach out to the community. I'm always happy to help. So you can comment below. You can reach out through email. Otherwise, hope everyone's enjoyed this. We're going to be taking off the next few weeks for the holidays. We'll be back in January with something I know not what yet. We've got a few options we're debating what we can get to and how we want to do it. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will talk to you later.